Anyways, today we have Louise, Cecilia, Hadley Hillyer with us. She is my mother, and I am the youngest child of hers. I'm Paula Regine Grace Hillyer Horlings. And today, Mom is going to give us some details from her life that we can carry on, and everyone can watch and see who she is, and ancestors from here on in will be able to see who they may look like, and it could be Mom. And we're just going to turn the time over to her.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. I'll begin by saying that I was born of goodly parents. I have a picture of them right here, if it's okay to show that. That's my mom and dad that were married on the 1st of July, 1914. And they had their first child in April the 3rd, 1915, a boy, my brother Art. He was named after my dad, whose name was Arthur Cecil Hadley. Art's name was Arthur Russell Hadley, named after my mother's surname, which was Russell. Her name was Odessa Russell. And 4 years later, I was born, and I was named after a missionary whom my mother knew when she was going to church in Portage la Prairie. And that's where she met my dad, at church. It was a good place to meet. Anyway, I also have a picture of me when I was 2 months old. Proves to you that I was a little kid.
When were you born?
And I was born on the 25th of April, 1919, so I'm getting to be a pretty old lady. In fact, everybody had a party for me the other day for my 85th birthday. And this is a picture of the little shanty house where I was born. And my mom and dad moved there when they were first married, and my mom always wanted a new house. But guess what? My dad got a new barn and a new granary first. And but after 29 years, she did get a new house and immediately moved out of it because my dad got a job as farm instructor at the Indian Reservation, Long Plain Reservation. And the house that we built was moved out to, in fact, there's a picture of it here in the making, picture of the house that my dad and my brother built, which they did not live in very long.
And where was it located?
It was located on the farm at Edwin, where I was born. I grew up there for 15 years, and I have many happy memories of my childhood. I can remember little things about growing up there. We were what we called pretty poor. I didn't know we were poor because I always had enough to eat and enough to wear, and always had a good time. My mom and dad always took me to the card whist drives and to the dances. In fact, here's a picture of my mom and me, and she had made me this lovely dress. It was wine-colored, and she covered the buttons and everything. And I was 14 years old in this picture. And they had a hard time dance at the school. And most people think, you know, if you're hard up, you should go around with holes in your pants and ragged sleeves and stuff. Well, growing up, I can remember that she always saved all the sugar sacks and the flour sacks and bleached them all out and made tea towels, and she made my underwear. And this day, she had made this lovely dress, and she bleached it all and then dyed it a beautiful rose color and wore it to the dance. And one of the judges met her on the stairs at the schoolhouse where we always had the dances, and he said, "I hear that you made your dress." She said, yes, I did. And he didn't say any more, but when they gave out the prizes, my mother got first prize because she said, even though you're poor, you don't have to look untidy. You can always look tidy and nice. And she really did. She was a nice looking gal, my mom was. And one of the kind of fun things that I remember about the flour sack underwear, we had always had to make do with what we had on the farm, of course. And in the summertime, they always grew raspberries and strawberries and things like that in a big garden. And when we wanted to make jelly or jam or marmalade or something, we had to go to the bush where they grew wild. And so one day, my mom asked me if I would go with her to pick cranberries. And it was about over a half a mile, I remember, I know. And she took a milk pail with her. Well, when we got there, the fruit was so loaded down on the bushes that she couldn't quit picking them. She was thinking of the next winter, I think. She wanted to provide for her family. And so when the bucket was full, she said, Louise, you take off those pantaloons and then I'm going to fill them with cranberries. So I had to take off my pantaloons, tied up the legs, and filled those pantaloons with cranberries and took them home, and she made the most wonderful marmalade. I can see it, I can taste it. And it was about the color of what we call cranberry now. Wonderful stuff. Anyway, that was one of the things that I remember. I also remember that she loved flowers, and she was the brains, but my dad was the brawn when it came to flower gardens. Wherever she went, she always had beautiful flowers. People used to drive past our place when they could have gone another way so that they could look at her gardens. Mostly petunias and dahlias and gladiolas, things like that that grew easily in Manitoba. And when I was 14, I finished grade 10 and I went out to work at a farmer's place for the harvest. And they had a son, one son, and his name was Grant. Their name was Mr. and Mrs. Lamb, and I worked for them for 3 different falls in threshing time. And when I say work, I really mean work. We had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and get breakfast for all the men, and that meant giving them potatoes and eggs and everything else for breakfast. And then get all these great big huge pots of potatoes and vegetables ready for lunch. I even made pies for those guys, and there must have been at least 8 men at threshing time. But I remember one time when we were out there, there was a fellow who lived across the street whose name was Norman Voss. Nobody in my family will remember that name, but they will remember Grant Lamb because he became the Western Canadian Fiddlers Champion. And I have a record of his, and I play it every once in a while and dance around the kitchen to it because it's so much fun. The kind of dances, the kind of music that we danced to at the school. And so anyway, one day when I must have been about 17 at this time, 16 maybe, Grant had been over and played the violin with this fellow across the road. He just lived across the road. And they used to have a good time together. And they say that sometimes when people have mental problems, they turn against the one who loves them the most and who they really loved the most. And sometimes it happens. And this one day, he turned against Grant. He said he was going to do away with him. And so we were looking out the window, or it was early in the morning. The sun was just coming up, and And Norman came out of his house and started walking along the road in front of Lamb's place, and he had a gun in his hand, and he would throw it up in the air and catch it, and he'd throw it up in the air and catch it, and it would glint in the sun, and oh, it scared me to death. And I guess it did his mom too, because she said, hey, she says, we've got to get out of this house. We'll go out the bedroom window and he won't see us. Well, we walked past the lane and on down the road, so we were lucky to get out to the barn, and we got up into the hayloft, and we looked out the knotholes in the barn to see what was going on. And in the meantime, she had got a hold of her husband to phone his brother, and his brother phoned the RCMP to come out and see what was going on, I guess. In the meantime, he had hitched up his 4-horse team to the binder, what we called a binder, to do the grain, and they went out in the field to see what was going on, and they arrested him, and they brought him back, and he had a gun with him which didn't have any bullets in it, and found out later that he would not eat anything himself because it was said it was all poison. He wouldn't give his horses anything to eat or drink because he said it was poisoned. So he was really a mental case, and it was kind of sad, but they did take him away to the mental home, and that's where he died. But that was something that still stands out in my memory as when I worked at that farm. And something else that stands out in my memory there too is when I was invited down the road to McConaughey's. The name was McConaughey, and they had the missionaries coming out, and this one missionary came and invited me to come. This is a picture of Elder Hensey. He invited me to come to a cottage meeting, and he gave me my first Book of Mormon, which I don't have anymore because Dad was so excited about giving away Books of Mormon that he gave it away. And I was kind of disappointed about that, but that was okay, as long as somebody got it that read it. And after I had finished working on the farm there, I went to my aunt and uncle's place at High Bluff. Do I have a picture of my aunt and uncle at High Bluff? Anyway, I have this picture of my mom and her brothers and her sister. This is my mom, and this is my uncle, Sam. And he was the dad of John Russell, my cousin. And I don't know whether I ever told you, but John signed up for the war, and he wanted to be a pilot because his next door neighbor was a pilot. But he didn't make pilot, but he did make gunner. So he had his gunner's wings. And I've got the picture here somewhere. Patience, patience here. You find it. You're better at finding things than I am. Well, before I go on to him, while she's looking, I'll show you this picture of me when I was 2 or 3 years old, about. My mother always made all the dresses, and she actually made the dress that I have on in, where's that picture?
The going away dress?
No, the picture of me when, with my mom and dad when I was 2 months old. Where is it? Did we not get that one out? I thought you had a picture of it on your wall. Anyway, this is me when I was 3, and pretty chubby, eh? I'm still chubby. So,
One of your blessing dress, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, the picture that I have when I was 2 months old is was one of the dresses my mom made, and she made a little slip for it, and she did a lot of crocheting, about this much all around them. And I was, I guess, baptized or blessed or something in it. And so when my kids were born, they all were blessed in that dress, even the boys. The boys said, oh, that was kind of funny for a boy to be put in a dress, but that's what I did until Don came along, and Don wasn't blessed in it. He had a little pair of rompers, I think. But Paula was blessed in it, and since then I believe that most of her kids have been blessed in that dress. So it's quite a unique little dress, and we still have it. It's 85 years old now, I guess. Kind of falling apart, but that's okay. Keeping house for an old lady, this old lady here. Her name was Mrs. McKillop, and her family owned the funeral business there. And she was very nice to me. She was really a lovely lady. And it was while I was working for her that my dad said, I want you to get some more education. And I had started to go to night school to be a stenographer, secretary or something. And he said, I'll give you the money, and I want you to go to a day school. So I went to day school for 3 months, and the lady in charge sent me out to work after 3 months at school, which wasn't very smart, I don't think, because I didn't have my shorthand up as well as it should have been. But I got along okay, and they said I would be a good secretary, but something happened along the way. I met somebody, and it was this guy. I met him at a dance. He bought a whole slew of tickets and danced every dance with me. And it ended up that we got married, and this was taken in front of his dad's mom's place in Vancouver in Central Park. And this is my going away outfit. I remember I had it tailored by a tailor, handmade, that coat, and I think it cost me $22 at the time. That was a fortune, because I never made much more than that when I was working. Oh, and here comes somebody with the wedding picture. This should have come. This is putting the cart before the horse, but that's okay. And most of you will probably have seen this picture, or maybe in years to come you'll look at it and say, well, there's my great-great-grandmother and my great-great-grandfather, and have fun. This is a picture. Can you see this one, Trev? This is a picture of my wedding cake, and Fred and I made our own wedding cake. We mixed up all the fruit and everything, and cut it at the wedding. We were married in Winnipeg, and we went to it was a house which catered to weddings. It was very nice. It was a big, big house, and we catered to weddings. And I can remember a part of the dinner. I know we had a wonderful dinner. We had a tomato soup course, and we had a turkey and all the trimmings course, and we had pie for dessert, and then we had this wedding cake. And we cut the wedding cake, and we had to catch a train for Vancouver. That's where we were going on our honeymoon. And we didn't have much time, so I had to leave to go to change. And one of the fellows who was at the wedding said to Fred, he said, I guess you're kind of worried about, or you don't have to worry about dressing. That's what he said, because Fred had his uniform on. And Fred said, Well, I'm not worried about the dressing. He said, it's the undressing I'm worried about. Thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, here's another picture of us. When we got to Vancouver, his mom and dad took us on a boat up to Squamish, BC. And the name of the boat was the Lady Cecilia, which was my middle name. I didn't finish telling you about my cousin John. His dad was my mom's brother. And when I was, I guess it was just before I was born, they had this bad flu that came along in after the war, about 1918 or 19. And his dad died from the flu, and they also had a little boy, 2-year-old boy, who died 2 days later. And they were both buried in the same coffin. And she was pregnant with John at the time, and so that was the only boy she had left. When she had him, my mom said she came out to our place and she just cried all summer. It was kind of sad. And then when the war came along in the 1940s, he joined up and got his gunner wings, and he made 7 sorties over Germany. And the last one, the plane was shot so badly that it crashed into the North Sea, and none of them were ever found. And my aunt had a bad stroke after that, and she never spoke a word again for 27 years. She lived 27 years after that and never spoke. Sad stories, but they're ones that are in my memory. I had girlfriends and boyfriends. I still have Ethel Mann, who is still my girlfriend, and Margaret Lamb, who is still my girlfriend. And that's fun to keep in touch with people that you have known for 60-odd years, 65 years more. This is when we first got married. We lived, of course, in Portage la Prairie, and then Fred got transferred out to Sea Island, BC. And we lived in a reconverted garage, which his sister and her husband had redone. It was a cute little place. It was kind of a living, bedroom, kitchen, all in one room, and it had a couple of rooms at the back, little tiny storage rooms and washrooms and so on at the back. And we were quite happy there. One day, his mom and his sister came over to visit me. Wes had already been born. He was 9 months old. And he was in the crib, and they came over to visit. And it was kind of lucky they did, because usually I would just pop over to their place and visit with them while Wes was having his little snooze in his crib, which was only about from, maybe 50 feet away. But anyway, they were over this day, and while we were visiting, we heard this crackling up in the ceiling, and I looked in the stove, and there was wood in there. We had a wood stove. There was wood that had never even started to burn yet, and I looked up in the ceiling, and I could see flames going around up this chimney. And we could tell that things were not good. So we told Grandma to go phone the fire department. So she ran to phone the fire department. Edith took the baby out of the crib and ran out of the house, and I started throwing things out the door. And I had just bought a beautiful silk dress. It was a gorgeous dress. I threw it out the door. It was still in the box. And of course, Grandma phoned the fire department. They said it wasn't their jurisdiction, so they had to move it to a different jurisdiction. And by the time they got there, 15 minutes later, everything was in ruins. This is one of the relics that is left from that fire. You can see that it has still got the burn marks on it. And Paula thinks that's precious. And this is a picture of my firstborn. He was a beautiful baby. And he wasn't a very happy baby. He had colic and he cried a lot. When the house burned down, we moved into this house. And it was okay. But after that, we moved into a brand new house a mile or so away. And by this time, my mom and dad had moved out to Vancouver. And that was nice because we had family on both sides then. Let me see. We moved from there out to Sea Island to EMQ's. We sold the house, the first house we bought, we paid $2,500 for it. Sold it for $3,300. The second house we bought was, we paid $4,800 for it and sold it for $5,500. I don't know where the money went. I can never remember where the money went. And when we moved out to the EMQ's, we could only stay there until the house had a house ready for us. And this was the one we moved in from the EMQ's. I think when we were in EMQ's, no, when we were in this house, Wes pulled the fire alarm, had all the fire department there.
When was Jim born?
And Jim was born when we were in our first house, which I don't have a picture of at the moment here. Anyway.
When was he born?
Jim was born the 29th of August, 1946. Wes was born on the 21st of May, 1944. I forgot to tell you, when I was talking about Elder Hinsey giving me my first Book of Mormon, that I moved into Winnipeg and stayed with Mrs. Bunnage, who was the midwife when I was born. They came down. My mother had a difficult time having my brother, and so she decided that when I was coming along that she was going to get to the hospital in Portage-la-Prairie, which was 15 miles away. And Bunnages had a car. They used to have those touring cars in those days with the flaps on the sides. And she phoned them, said I was on the way, so they came down, and Will Bunnage, her husband, took one look at her and he said, "You ain't going anyplace." And she was so mad, she said, "I threw my hat in the corner and went to bed." And 1 hour later, I was born. And so when they moved to Winnipeg, and when I was 18, I went to Winnipeg. Instead of finishing school, like I should have, well, I did finish grade 11 at High Bluff with my Aunt Clara and Uncle Harry. But stupid me, they told me I could either be a teacher or a nurse with grade 11 in those days. Just take a little more education. And oh, I guess I must have been homesick or something, because I went back home and did housework instead. Silly person, you know. And now I tell my grandkids, be sure you get your education. Be sure you get that piece of paper. It's important. I hope they listen. I went to live with Bunnages, and she had invited the elders over to have what they called cottage meetings in those days. And I was living with them, and so I was there to hear the discussions and see all the pictures. They used to show slides of the ruins down in Central America, those kinds of things, and tell a little bit about the history of the church. And I thought, how could anybody write this book and it not be true? And as I read it, I thought, well, this is true. And so I had a testimony at that time. And when I went back to Portage after working in Winnipeg for some time, I wrote to the branch president and asked him if I could be baptized. That's silly, eh? Most missionaries, they just would love to have had me as a golden contact. I went into Winnipeg and I was baptized the same day as Roberta Jack. And I never looked back since. Fred wasn't a member when we got married, but 10 months after we were married, he had the discussions from the bishop in Vancouver. And he joined the church too, and he was smoking at the time. And he thought he was going to be able to quit. Well, he did quit, and he got baptized, and like a lot of other people, couldn't handle it, and he went back smoking again. And when Wes was about 5 years old, he would sit on his dad's knee and take the cigarettes out of his mouth. And Fred said to me, he says, you know, when my children start taking cigarettes out of my mouth, it's time to quit. He said it's been hard. He tried several times. So I said, well, we had been posted to Clare's home, and we wanted to go to the temple, to be sealed in the temple. And I said, well, you can't go if you smoke. So we went to see the stake president, and he said, would you like to be administered to? And Fred said, yes. He said, I would. I want to go to the temple. So he administered to him with Brother Tillich, his name was, an uncle of Bill and Lois. And Fred never smoked again. He never, ever took another cigarette. He said that he still used to put his hand in his back pocket, because that's where he used to carry his cigarettes. I don't know why. Maybe he didn't have a pocket on his shirt. But I guess the craving was still there, but he never gave in to it. And so it was a testimony to me of the priesthood, the power that the priesthood has, and the willpower that Fred had, and the faith that he had. And as we had our children, after that we had Myrna, and she was a doll. In fact, I used to take her to the health clinic, and this good-looking doctor, he said, looked at her and he said, boy, he says, I was born 30 years too soon. It was kind of nice. She was a pretty baby. And then Don came along. He was a beautiful baby. That was when we were in Clare's home. He was born 17th of February, 1953. And we lived there for 2.5 years and transferred again. My kids said they never did have a home.
When was Myrna born?
Myrna was born on the 12th of January, 1950. In Vancouver. The first 3 were all born in St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. And so we moved to Southport. And that is where the fun began. Because, what have we here?
Southport.
We have the Hillyer family, and this is the PMQs that we lived in for 6.5 years. We also lived 6.5 years in Sea Island, Vancouver. And Dad must have been taking this picture. Anyway, it was a great family. We had a wonderful family. Wes kind of got into a little bit of trouble there. But
What trouble?
Oh, he got in trouble at school and got kicked out of school. I don't know how many times we tried to keep that kid in school. And he was smart. He even had some of his essays put in the paper, the Portage Graphic. The teacher put his efforts in the paper, and we sent a lot of his stuff out to Ottawa, which all got lost for some reason. And he was good in everything except math, and he still can't do math. But it was there that our youngest was born. I had had an operation, and the doctor said, no, you won't be able to have any more babies. For some reason, we had one more. And if I hadn't had that one more, our lives would have been so much different and so much less important. And I just thank Heavenly Father every day for saving her. And it was because of the priesthood that she's here today, too. Because she came at a 7-month time, and she weighed 3 pounds 8 ounces, I believe. And the doctor said that he didn't think that either one of us would live. And Fred said, he says, you do what you can, and we'll do what we can. So he got all the branch members together, and they fasted and they prayed that everything would be okay. And as she was coming along, the doctor said she was breached and she wouldn't make it. He told Fred that your wife maybe will live, but your baby won't. And so we all prayed, and Howard Lane and Fred gave me a blessing that everything would be all right. The next morning the doctor said, did you feel any movement in the night? And I said, no. He said, well, the baby's not breached anymore. The baby will be born normally. And after a lot of painful hours, she was born. And this doctor still didn't think that she was going to live. I could see what he was doing. He was pressing on her chest and blowing in her mouth, and finally he wrapped her in a blanket and gave her to the nurse, and he said, go give her suction. So they took her away, and we had a nurse for her for one night, and I guess we never looked back. She was in the hospital for a month, and she didn't gain very much weight. She gained more weight in the week we had her home than she did in the whole month that she was in the hospital. But she grew into a little rotund little baby and a wonderful little child, and everybody loved her, and everybody still loves her.
And when was I born?
And you were born on the 22nd of September, which should have been in November of 1955.
And where was I born?
And you were born in Portage La Prairie, where I was born. I wasn't born in that hospital. I was supposed to have been, but I was born at home. And she came home, and she was not very fat. I bathed her in a wash basin. That was her bathtub. And we have pictures of that too somewhere. But she grew into a beautiful young lady, and she got married, and she had 4 wonderful children, and they're all wonderful. I love them to pieces. Now, where are we? Here is a picture of the members of our little Portage La Prairie branch at a conference in Winnipeg on Academy Road. We had to go 45 miles from Portage to Winnipeg, or 50 at that time, because they hadn't straightened the road out yet. But the authorities made Fred the branch president. Cal Hill was his counselor, and Howard Lane was his other counselor. And this is just a picture taken at conference that day. And we have Bill and Lois Tillich there, and Elder Gross and Elder Thomas, and Paula and Donnie and Billy Tillich and Shauna and June Bone. I think Kay Bone must have taken this picture. And we still keep in touch with all these people. It's wonderful. Elder Thomas surprised me one day about 2 years ago, showed up at my door. It was wonderful to see him. And when we left Portage la Prairie, got transferred to Rivers, and from there we got transferred to Edmonton. Kids continued school. Wes got married to Janice Wells, and they had one boy. He has a son who lives in Kamloops. He's married to Monica, and they have a daughter, Jade. And John will be 39 years old, I guess, this October. And he's my oldest grandchild. Myrna had 2 boys, and she adopted Terry. And Terry says she's my first granddaughter. And Jim had, Jim got married, when? It's here somewhere. He got married February 14th of February 1972, and they have 11 children and 3 adopted children. Myrna, I told you about Myrna. Don has 4 children. Don married Norma Dolly. And Don was born the 17th of February 1953. They have 4 children and 2 adopted children. And is there anybody else?
Did you say when Myrna got married? And who she married?
Myrna got married on the 28th of December 1968. Married John William Squire. And I told you about their family. And we have all these names on file. Anybody wants to see whose family is who, they just have to look at that. Here's a picture of my mom and dad on their 50th anniversary. My dad got sick, and he got leukemia. He had it for 5 years, and he passed away while we were in Rivers. One time when I went from Rivers, picked up my mom in Portage la Prairie and went on to Winnipeg when he was sick in the hospital in Winnipeg. And we had a car that wasn't working too well. If we ever stopped it, we had a hard time to get it to go. And we got in there and we saw my dad, and he didn't look very well. And I was worse because I almost passed right out. They had to take me out. My dad was born on the 15th of December 1890 and died the 17th of August 1970.
Where was he born?
And my dad was born in Little Britain, Ontario, right near Seagrave. We always call it Seagrave because that was the nearest place. And he had a brother, Albert, a sister, Gladys, and a sister, Effie. And I can remember, Effie came to Manitoba with her dad and the boys, but Aunt Gladys stayed back in Ontario and married there. And we knew their families too. In fact, Aunt Effie's daughter, Edith, and I were great pals when we were growing up. We used to go spend holidays at each other's house. And she's the only cousin I have left back in Manitoba. It's kind of sad, but we are the only ones left of that family. I don't have a brother left. I never did have a sister. I just had two brothers, one 4 years older and one 4 years younger. And so I always felt like I was an only child but I did have a cousin across the road who I played with, and so that was good to have him.
And when was Jack born?
Jack was born on the 7th of November, 1923.
Who did he marry?
And he married Ruth Hadley.
And
And
her maiden name?
Patterson. She was Ruth Patterson. Yeah. I can remember Dad and I used to go out. Jack and Ruth were married. They got married when she was 18 and he was 19. And her mom and dad lived on the farm. And when Fred was courting me, we went out there one weekend. And they only had one bed, a big bed. And so Ruth and Jack slept in the middle, and I slept beside Ruth, and Jack slept beside, or Fred slept beside Jack on the other side of the bed. Well, we got laughing and carrying on like people do, you know. And Fred used to have a saying, if things were going well, he'd say, well, that's cooking with gas, you know. That was supposed to have been you're doing okay. But instead of saying that's cooking with gas, he said, oh, that's gassing with cook. And everybody started to laugh. They thought that was so funny. And it was so funny that Fred fell out of bed. He laughed so hard. There wasn't much room to stay in bed. But that was a funny thing that we remembered from being there. But both of my brothers died with cancer. And so that left me all alone. My mom died at the age of 89 plus. She would have been 90 in January, and she died in September. September the 2nd, 1982. Whoever's reading this 100 or 2 years from now, they'll think that, my goodness, she was an old lady. But she was a young old lady. She always knew what she was talking about. She never lost her memory. She was okay. She was a real person. Sometimes we look at names way back and we don't think that they're real people, that they're just a name on the page, but they did have a life. They were real people, and they still are. They're still real people.
I don't remember how old I was when Grandma came to live with us when we lived in Cardston.
It was 1970. Let's see, Dad died when?
Dad died August 17th, 1970.
Well, then it was in 1971, because she spent one winter in the house in Portage by herself, and then she phoned up one day and said, you said I could come and live with you sometime if I wanted to. She said, I can't shovel snow anymore and I can't cut grass anymore. Can I come and live with you? And I said, sure, come. So she came, and we were just finishing the house. And Don, I think he had spent one night in his bedroom or two. She took over his bedroom, and Don was relegated to the basement. But he never complained. Don and Dad built the house in Cardston. We moved down to Cardston from Edmonton, and he and Dad practically built the house. We have a picture of, can't see the house very well, but we do have a picture of the beautiful golden trees out in front, and it was always a pretty place. The grandkids always liked to come there. I remember having family reunions there, and we had fun. I remember one family reunion we had a tug of war, and all the men were lined up against each other, and it ended up that Don pulled the whole other bunch of men by himself. he, he was a strong one, I tell you. And that was the time we had the pie eating contest too. And that was fun.
Yeah, I remember when Grandma came to live with us, and my dad had built a commode out of a brown old chair.
Oh yeah.
And I remember being young and kind of knew what it was for, but kind of didn't know what it was for. And I remember thinking, opening the door when Grandma wasn't in her room, and thinking she was just like a queen, and that was her throne.
That was her throne, all right.
Yeah. I remember that old chair.
Where are we now?
We are you're at the house in Cardston, and some of the family reunions that we used to do.
Yeah.
And you can talk about Dad and Jim and how they used to entertain people, and
Oh
how
yeah.
embarrassed you used to be when they'd sing the old sow song.
Yeah, but the kids still sing the old sow song, and now it's okay. This was one of the ones that they played a trick on Fred. They gave him a sandwich and 2 slices of bread, and they put a rubber spider in it, and he bit into it. Usually he was the one that was doing the tricks. But you can see the sandwich with the little spider sticking out of it.
And where did you work at when you lived in Cardston all those years?
Oh, when I lived in Cardston, the day after I got to Cardston from Edmonton, I had a job at the hospital as a ward aide, and I worked there for 14 years. And I've been retired from that job now for 20 years, as of the 30th of April. And it just seems like yesterday, but it was a good part of our lives. And in the interim, we went on trips. We had lots of trips. We went to Europe, went to Rome, we went to 9 countries in Europe, went to England. First time we went with Jack and Ruth, and we hired a car. In England we went on a bus trip, which was wonderful. The Lake District of England was my favorite, and we saw so many things in England that I see on TV now, and I think, ooh, I was there, you know, I loved it. But England's a wonderful place, except that now it's pretty expensive. And then we went through 9 countries in Europe. Of course, it doesn't take long. 2 days you can go through 9 countries in Europe. But we ended up in Rome, and my doctor said, well, the treasures of the earth are in Rome. And indeed they are. They have wonderful things in Rome. They have all the buildings that have been there for so many hundreds of years. And they look like they're worn on the outside, but I found that when you go in the buildings, they all have marble floors that are just shining like glass, and they're so clean and wonderful. It was a great place to visit and to tour around. We went to the Isle of Capri, which is off of Naples. I can't begin to tell you about the traffic over there. It was unbelievable. In one place, we were coming home from a trip, and we were trying to get to our hotel in Rome, and the bus driver couldn't get through the street because a little Volkswagen had parked itself, still running. I guess the fellow had run into the restaurant, and he intended to come right out, but we waited and waited and waited, and finally the bus driver and one of the other fellows with him got out and picked the Volkswagen up and set it over far enough that we could get through. It was really funny. Traffic's unbelievable, especially at carnival time, and that's when it was. But we went to Venice. We had a wonderful time in Venice. We went to the smallest country in the world. What was the name of that one? They have their own stamps even. and it's where Francis of Assisi lived. Wonderful, wonderful person he was, Saint Francis. And there are statues all over Italy of Saint Francis feeding the birds and things like that. And then next time we went on a little Volkswagen tour bus. That was exciting. Oh my, that driver, we couldn't believe that. There were only 10 of us on the bus, 2 from Sao Paulo, Brazil, 2 from Argentina, and there were 2 other couples from South America as well. And we were the only ones from Canada. The ones from Brazil she was a physician, and he was also a doctor. And they could speak enough English that they could tell us what was going on. And we enjoyed that very much. One of the things that stands out in my mind is we went to see Romeo and Juliet's statue, and the balcony where he presumably courted her. And then we went to what was the name of the city where they have this big church, and it had 132 spires, and every spire had a statue on it. Amazing. It was really amazing. And inside the church, we had a guide, and the churches there all have stained glass windows, and they're not heated, they're very cold inside, and very few of them are used for church services. And this one church had a beam that came down from the ceiling, and it landed on a certain place on the floor every day at 12 o'clock, the beam from the sun. It was sort of like a sundial, but it was just a little hole in the ceiling. And in that church, they had this one, the lady who was touring around with us, our tour guide, said, look at this statue, or this window. She said, they've got a picture of Christ in the boat, and John the Baptist has a pitcher of water, and he's pouring the water over Christ's head. She said, this is the baptism of Christ. And that sort of stood out in my mind, because we think that baptism should be done by immersion, of course. I think I'll stop talking for a few minutes, get my voice back. Trevor wants to know how I met my husband. Well, I'll tell you. He was posted to MacDonald after he had been to Manning Depot, as he called it, in Edmonton. He was posted to MacDonald, and the airmen didn't have much to do in that little place, and so the powers that be used to have dances and things for the airmen to come to, and then they would invite the girls in town to go to these dances, to dance with the airmen, to entertain them, I guess. And so I was asked to go to this dance at the arena in Portage-la-Prairie, and they had a wonderful orchestra. Dima Leslie had a wonderful orchestra, played everything like that. And this guy came along and asked me for a dance, and he had this whole string of tickets in his hand. And he was a good dancer. And I was a good dancer. Everybody told me I was anyway.
And why did he have to
And-
buy tickets?
Well, it was jitney dance.
Oh, what does that mean?
Jitney dance is when they pay 10 cents a ticket to dance. And so I guess, I don't know whether he bought $1 worth of tickets or what, but he had a string of them anyway. And he asked me to dance every dance. I think he danced maybe one other one. The thing that impressed me was how he whistled in my ear. I've never heard anyone who could whistle like he could. It was, well, I've never heard a bird even be able to whistle like that. I can't do it, and I don't think anybody ever could, but it was an amazing way that he had this trill to his whistle. And we enjoyed each other's company, and he asked if he could walk me home, and that did it. We just, he just was in town every time he got a chance. He would come in on the bus, or he would hitchhike in with somebody, and we always ended up together.
Was he a gentleman?
He was a gentleman. He was a very gentle gentleman. He was really good. We used to walk around the park and swing on the swings and look at the birds, and I think we went canoeing once on the lake at Portage there. It was fun. And I remember when when my aunt got word that my cousin John was missing in action, we went out to their place at High Bluff, and Fred sat at my feet. We were sort of secluded in the den, I guess it was, and I was sitting on a chair, and he sat at my feet and looked up at me, and he says, "Will you marry me?" My heart melted right there. And I said yes, and that was Christmas. And I got a diamond for Christmas.